Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's program, Ask a Death Doula, with thanatologist Matilda Garrido. My name is Emily Hill-Wright, and I'm the Director of Operations at the Merchants House Museum, New York City's only family home to be preserved intact, both inside and out, from the 19th century. Home to the Treadwell family and their Irish servants for nearly 100 years, the Merchants House is complete with the family's original furnishings and personal possessions. The house offers, with unparalleled authenticity, an intimate look at life and death in the mid-19th century New York. As many of you know, for the last 12 years, the Merchants House has been fighting proposed development next door, construction that is guaranteed to cause irreparable damage to our landmark building and will force us to close the museum to the public for at least 2 years. Last December, in a shocking betrayal, the Landmarks Preservation Commission voted to approve the development, in spite of overwhelming and unanimous opposition from the community, preservation organizations, public officials, engineers, and preservation architects. This disastrous vote is a warning to every other landmark in New York City. If this can happen to the Merchants House, the very first building in Manhattan designated a New York City landmark in 1965, then every landmark in New York is at risk. We have just launched a letter writing campaign urging the Adams administration and the Buildings Department to step in to protect the Merchants House, a city-owned interior and exterior landmark and a beloved and irreplaceable educational and community resource. Please take just 30 seconds to sign your name and submit a letter. I am posting the direct link to that letter writing campaign in the chat here. If you click it now, you will be able to submit your letter before our program tonight even begins. And yes, you can submit a letter even if you don't live in New York City. Tourism, as you know, is an important economic engine in the city, and it is important that the administration hears from supporters from all over. Before we begin during tonight's program, please do feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome our moderator this evening, Matilda Garrido. Matilda is a certified thanatologist and holds dual master's degrees in bioethics and thanatology, the study of death, dying, and bereavement. She has worked extensively with the dying and bereaved, and she volunteers at the Merchants House in various capacities, including as co-host of our monthly paranormal video podcast, In the Spirit of Science. So welcome, Matilda. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you so much, Gabby, Diane, and Angela for being here. I'm so pleased that we can all get together and talk about this subject, which actually I notice increasing interest in end-of-life doulas, the work that they do, what they can offer to families, and all that great stuff. So first, I want to just let everybody know that Angela is logging on in 1 second. She was having some technical difficulties, but she'll be back. I have the pleasure of working with Diane and Angela at the University of Vermont's End of Life Doula training program. The link for this will be put in the chat. It's a wonderful program if you have interest in training as an end of life doula. And I have the pleasure of knowing Gabby through Diane and Angela. The three of them are the authors of the Doula Toolkit, which is available on Amazon, and I commend it to you. We'll have the links to the book and all of their individual websites in the chat, as well as a link to the UVM program. So again, I just want to thank you guys for being here and give you just a moment to introduce yourselves and your work. Diane, do you want to begin? Oh, I think you're muted, Diane.
Okay. Hi, I'm Diane. And like you said, Matilda, thank you for having us. It's so great to work with you at the University of Vermont. I've been an end-of-life doula since before I think the name became popular, maybe in around 2015, but I've worked as a hospice volunteer and kind of ended up being a community doula for years and years before that with just neighbors and friends. I was kind of always that person, just somehow really comfortable with end of life and death and dying. And, you know, like most of us, it started with that pivotal experience with my grandfather dying that made me go, wow. And I just wanted to learn more. But I think over time, I'm really leaning into the education piece. You know, I've written a lot of books about finding meaning in life and peace in death, and teaching at the University of Vermont, and kind of learning how to create a field that's consistent so that we can all rise up as doulas and do a great job. So that's what the Doula Toolkit was all about. And that's what the writing that I continue to do, and even teaching it. I think it's a beautiful field, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. And I think educating, the up and coming doulas of the world is really an important piece.
Thank you. Yeah. Gabby, how about you? You have a tremendous following under the hospice heart. You are a hospice nurse and end of life doula, and hold lots of trainings and classes for people around end of life. So tell us what brought you here.
Well, thank you for having us. First of all, I'm definitely more interested now. I want to learn more about the Merchants House Museum. I think that's fascinating what you do. I have only been doing this work for a little over 10 years. I started doing it because a friend of mine asked if I could help take care of her husband, who was one of my best friends, when he was dying. And I was at his bedside. I watched this very strong, healthy, viral man become weaker and dependent on others for his care. And they cared for him well. His hospice team came in, and I was in awe. And so because of that, I changed my whole life and went back to school to do this work. And I wanted to work in hospice. It was, yes, I wanted to be a nurse, but I wanted to be a hospice nurse. And I love the work. I have had a lot of wonderful mentors and teaching and experience. I've seen over maybe 2,000 last breaths. And being a doula was not, at the time, much like Diane, at the time it wasn't the flavor of the week, which it is now. Everybody loves the doula work, which is wonderful. But at the time, I felt it was more of a spiritual connection for me. I wanted to do a deeper dive into what death and dying meant and what my role is. I think I wanted to learn more about me and what I was capable of and what I could bring to that bedside. And so I became a doula, not because I wanted a new career, not because I was going to change directions, but because I knew if I did that deep dive training, I would be a better version of myself. And so I did that. And I am a better hospice nurse with my doula education. But I also feel like as a doula, even though I have to separate the roles from hospice nurse and doula, I do feel that I have a better understanding of how to help someone when they are dying, but also for those who are preparing to say goodbye. It's much like what Diane said, education is very key for me. I would like to educate people and give them the tools to be able to provide this care in a beautiful, compassionate way, but also to help relieve others of the fears they have and the uncertainty, and help them maybe embrace their curiosity and answer their questions and make death less frightening. I want to make death less frightening.
Yeah, that's great. I want to just hit upon one thing that you said about you had a desire to know yourself better. I think that's so important, and that's something that we certainly stress at the UVM training program. Is it's almost like a self-development course, because if you don't know yourself, your own shadows, your own pain points, you're not going to be able to effectively serve others in a very vulnerable time. So what I would like to convey to anyone who is thinking about working with a doula or curious about what the benefits of working with a doula are is we take very seriously that we want to know ourselves as well as possible so that we don't bring ourselves into the room.
Well,
I mean, we bring all of our good things, but not our,
Absolutely. And I say that all the time. This is not about us.
Yeah.
How can we be present and guide and support and nurture and care someone without making it about us? And I think in order to be able to do that, you have to remove your ego, which is sometimes hard, right? But to remove your ego and to understand what it means to be present for someone else and not make it about you. You have feelings, you have a reaction, you're going to tell a story when you walk away that day, but how can you let it be all about them? And in order to do that, you have to go deep inside of who you are and what is most important to you and find your gifts. And I think the doula training helped me with that.
Yeah, great. Angela, what led you here to this field? You've been active for quite some time. And I
Thank
want to
you.
also note for everybody that Angela not only serves human beings, she actively serves animals and their owners as well in End of Life Matters. So,
Yeah, well, thank you, Matilda. I actually came to End of Life Care about 7 years ago. Started as a hospice volunteer and just really enjoyed that. But honestly, it really wasn't until after the death of one of my own family members, when I really saw the impact of the care that he received from the hospice team, that I really found a passion to provide that same care for others at end of life. I had always been very fearful of death prior to that. I didn't know that there could be such beauty and forgiveness and healing at death, until that one. So I just took a lot of trainings and dove right into educating myself and became a doula. I was a graduate of the University of Vermont's course and a few others, and was able to work with the National End of Life Doula Alliance and actually served as their president for 2 years. So for the past 2 years, I've been working at the University of Vermont, both their End of Life Doula programs and, as you mentioned, the companion animal courses. And last year, I started my own company, Dragonfly End of Life Services. And as you mentioned, I do spend a lot of time also helping with companion animals at end of life. So about 2.5 years ago now, I partnered with a local mobile veterinarian, and
mm,
it's just been amazing experience. I work with her sometimes 2 to 3 days a week, to assist with all of her end of life clients and offer grief support for their pet caregivers as well. And I believe we were doing some looking at some of our notes the past few weeks, and I think we've done something like 300 in-home funeral,
wow.
I'm sorry, in-home euthanasia appointments since I've been working with her. So having those skills from the companion animal doula class and being able to put them into play, daily has really been rewarding for me. And I've been starting to offer a few more grief workshops as well for pet loss in my community.
Oh, that's great. And it's such a wonderful point that, pet grief is so misunderstood and disenfranchised and judged and ignored. It's really wonderful that we're now bringing resources to vets and to the community to help people through that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think there's such a need for it. And I've also noticed there's such a need to kind of also be the doula to that veterinarian or the vet mentor.
Mm-hmm.
They have such an emotionally challenged career set. They actually have a very high rate of death by suicide and depression. And after going through this many appointments with my veterinarian, I could see where that does get emotionally draining. So I really think some of the most important work that I get to do as an animal doula is that time that I'm with her in between appointments to help support her and hold that space with her so that she's no longer just carrying all of this by herself either.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get right into it. Diane, I'm going to start with you. So what can a death doula offer? Like, what would a family be able to expect from a relationship with a death doula if they were interested in hiring one? At the Merchant's House, we talk a lot about home care at the end of life because all of our family members, 8 members of the Treadwell family died at home and they were all cared for at home. But I think home death care back in the 19th century was very, very different than what a death doula would provide now. Back then it was, I don't want to say it was all medically based care, but certainly a lot of it was. And there's a different intentionality, I think, that a doula can bring into a relationship with a client. So, Diane, do you want to start us off? Like, what can people get from a death doula? Why would they hire one?
It completely depends on when they call us. So many people, especially since the pandemic, have just been really interested in the topic of talking about death and dying. So we're getting calls now for people who just want to do a life review or want to do their advanced directives and make sure that their their affairs are in order, at least their emotional affairs are in order, you know, and that they've really thought about it and they've talked about it. So it's really wonderful when somebody calls us who isn't even ill at the time, because then we can do all of the work. But for the most part, I usually get called out about a month to 3 months before someone dies. That's kind of the most typical for me. And so with a client like that, we always ask them what they need and what they're looking for. But some of the things that we offer them that I think are really helpful, as I mentioned, the life review, and I think it's really important for people to pause. I mean, a lot of times when people get a terminal diagnosis, they begin to slow down anyway, and they start thinking, going inward and thinking about, you know, what matters most and who matters most, and, you know, what's still important to me, and what's unsaid, what's undone, what's on my mind, what's bothering me. So the life review often is an opportunity to dig into those areas that might need a little bit of tending to before the end of life. So I usually do a life review chronologically, like starting through up till your 20s, you know, your childhood, and then go every decade of your life and just talk about it. And it's amazing what kind of things pop up. So when somebody calls us with enough time, I think the life review is like the golden nugget of doula work, for being able to just uncover what that particular client needs. And then once that's done, you know, as doulas, we're always listening to ideas for legacy projects. You know, a lot of times a life review will reveal to us, oh, this person collected this or enjoyed doing that, or they were a gardener, or they were a painter, or what have you. And so, you know, sometimes their passions in life can come together to create a beautiful legacy project. And we all know as doulas that it's really important for people to feel like their life has been meaningful, and that they have loved well, and that they've been loved, and also that they're going to be remembered. So a legacy project is a beautiful, like, doula tool to bring all of those, you know, into one particular project. And it also can be something really cool for somebody who's facing the end of their life to do with their time. You know, it just really taps into just the heartstrings. And then we'll do vigil work. So when somebody's actively dying, we'll put a schedule together, and the doulas will show up, you know, as needed, sitting around the bed to either be with our client or to give their family members a break. So those are the most important things. In many states now, we're supporting medical aid in dying, which is, you know, legal in a lot of states. And you can also travel to Vermont and Oregon now too. So it makes it really much more accessible. So we will support people with that as well. And a lot of times we help our clients with talking about their memorial and what they're going to want for, you know, their care afterwards, just to kind of have those conversations. I think it's great for people to be able to talk to somebody that isn't emotionally attached to them. It just seems like the conversations are much more fluid. Some people will call and say, you know, my husband won't talk to me, but then the doula shows up, and it's just kind of somebody who's not going to get as emotionally charged with the conversation. So I think we're really becoming more and more welcome in those kinds of conversations.
More of a neutral party.
Exactly.
So I want to talk about the difference between doulaing and hospice, but first I want to go to Angela. Angela, what do you see as things that a doula will not do?
Anything to do with medical care. That is definitely a limitation to our practice. So, and performing any kind of clinical task, any kind of monitoring of vital signs, administering medication, anything like that. And I know we've talked about it a little bit already, but doulas also really refrain from bringing our own values or beliefs or agenda into that situation and into our care of somebody else. And also, I think something that's important, something I kind of was thinking about yesterday with a new client that I have, how important it is for doulas not to stay in their lane and to remember their boundaries, that we do not take on the roles of the overall caregiver, or we don't take over the role or step on the boundaries of the hospice nurse or a home health aide, but that we have quite enough to do just within companioning them at end of life, and sharing just some of that basic end of life education. That seems to be where I'm finding a lot of people, especially if they're facing maybe the first expected death that they've dealt with, looking at what those common end-of-life signs and symptoms are, and just offering a little bit of end-of-life education seems to bring a lot of comfort to those families and friends.
It's kind of, I always equate it to like being a passenger in a car and helping the driver figure out the map and deciding, do we want to go here? Do we want to go there, in terms of exploring spiritual or emotional matters and things like that. Gabby, we had a lot of questions about the difference between doulaing and hospice. And as you have experience with both, I wondered if you could speak a little bit to that. People were wondering, does hospice call in a doula, or how does a doula work with a hospice team if a person is in hospice care?
Great question. So hospice is covered under the Medicare benefit, and it's a team. It's a team of a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, chaplain, home health aide, and volunteer. That's the hospice team. The doula is not a part of the hospice team yet. Could it happen down the line? Perhaps. Hospice is not going to call in a doula. A doula is something that the family usually will initiate and pay out of pocket. Most doulas, however, offer, it's kind of a combination of sort of a sliding scale, or offering without any charge or payment whatsoever, to having a specific dollar amount, but it is out of pocket for the person who's initiating it. Some hospices have trained their hospice volunteers to be doulas, so they can offer that. But within the scope of the hospice team, you do not have the luxury of time. We have, a minimal amount of time. Volunteers, hospice volunteers, some of them are trained to be doulas, do have a little more time, but they can't stay for however long they want. The doula has the luxury of time. We could stay, like Diane said, we could start way before a diagnosis is even brought to the table. Perhaps it's just someone who's curious and planning. And then a diagnosis comes in, and the doula will walk alongside them along that journey. Now, as a doula, if I have a private client, because I'm a hospice nurse, I think I have a very good idea of when they might be hospice appropriate. And then I will initiate the hospice beginnings, not just with the company that I work for as a hospice nurse, but any company. I want this to be their decision. But some hospices are being a little bit more aware of the benefits of a doula. And I think this would usually come from, most commonly, at least from my experience, as from the social workers, because they have such a vast amount of resources they can offer the family, such as caregivers. So I tend to put my name out to all social workers, saying that if you think this family might benefit from my services, here's my information. But really, it is not something that hospice will initiate. Some hospices don't bring it up at all. I am an end-of-life doula, but my company does not recognize that. They recognize the gifts of the doula, but they would never say, oh, we have Gabby, she's a doula. They would never do that. It's more like, hey, Gabby, can you use your doula stuff with this family? And of course, I'm going to say yes, because I would have brought it anyway. But I want doula on my badge, yes, because I'm so proud of it. And I do think it's sort of the sprinkles on my hospice cupcake. But I think that initially, it's the family who starts that.
So a doula doesn't necessarily have to come after a hospice admission. And Diane, I think, as you said, a well person can hire a doula if they are interested in doing that kind of advanced planning, that kind of legacy work, looking at documents like living wills and things like that. So a doula does not necessarily have to come before or after hospice. They can work together, they can work before, they can work after. So I think that that's very important to clarify. Anyone can work with a death doula at any time if they want to have some input into the circumstances that are probably going to surround the end of their lives, right? Like,
Absolutely.
I know a lot of people who are very, very interested because, and how many of us have been in this position? Someone close to you dies and you have to clear out the house, or the person dies without a will, or the person's very ill and they're in the hospital and they've never expressed their wishes. If you're someone who's well, but has an interest in saving the people you love from having to go through that, you can work with a death doula now to do some planning.
I teach a class, it's called Best 3 Months, and the intention with this class is that you create your own end of life plan based on what your wishes are. I have a variety of people who take it. I have terminal patients who have very little time left and they want to get their stuff in order and their wishes known. I have people who maybe recently experienced a death and they're questioning their own mortality and they want to know this. I also have family members who are caring for someone and they want to know how to do it. And I have people who want to work in this field, usually of which are doulas, who want to know how they can help somebody else plan their end of life. And it's everything. It could be advanced directives because doulas can do that, but it can also be like Diane does, the legacy work, or the just where do you want to be? Who do you want there? Doulas can help do that at any stage of life, whether there's a diagnosis or not.
Yeah. There was a question about training and education, what's necessary to become a doula. And I see Angela smiling because this is something we discuss pretty frequently. There are a lot of training programs that offer a certification as an end-of-life doula, while nothing like that really exists. And Angela, I want, if you want to jump in and start this conversation, because I think it's valuable when people are thinking about hiring a doula. What are you looking for in someone who is calling themselves an end-of-life doula, who says that they were trained as an end-of-life doula?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up. A lot of times I will see different trainers or different people who've completed an end-of-life doula or death doula training and say that they are a certified doula. There is not a license for this doula. To be a doula, there's not a accrediting body or a regulation. There's nothing like that there is for maybe a nurse or a social worker. And honestly, I don't think in some cases you don't even need to have training to be a doula. Some of the best doulas I know that I've worked with are those who have just been that person in their community and their family who has tended to the dead and dying their whole lives. But what I do think is really good to mention is there is a certain set of proficiency and confidence and skill that I think really goes into building that foundation of being a competent doula. And so I do really support being a part of one of those trainings. There's so many of them out there now. I think that there's
Right.
constantly doula trainings adding each day. I think a really great resource to share, as I mentioned earlier, the National End of Life Doula Alliance. They more commonly go by the acronym NEDA. Their website is nedaalliance.org. And not only do they have a great directory of all the trainings that are out there, because I think if anyone's interested in training, it's really beneficial to take a look at each of them yourself to find the one that resonates with you, that has a format that works for you. Because I've taken many of them and I found value in all of them, but they all have their different focuses and their different learnings. And not only can you find out, that director of trainers on that NEDA website, you can also find a doula on that website. It's listed by alphabet, by last name, and also by state. And also, I would encourage anybody watching or listening to reach out to somebody here on this webinar today. I think one of the best things about being a doula is having this end-of-life doula community. And we really modeled this supportive, compassionate care with each other as well. So there's a great network that we might be able to say, oh, you're looking for something specific. I know somebody who does that. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely reach out to us. And NEDA does offer what they call a proficiency assessment, so that doulas have an opportunity to pass that proficiency assessment and then share that with the community so that potential clients and people interested know that they have achieved that standard of credibility and understanding and know how to model the actual doula care and services.
Diane, you had raised your hand.
Oh, I was just going to add to what Gabby was saying and kind of going back to what you were saying initially early on about doing your own work first. And, you know, all the education and all that. We find at the University of Vermont, a lot of people are taking the course not to become doulas, but specifically to do their own work. And I just think that's super cool because then you've got people who understand how to be with the dying and have taken away maybe their own like triggers and shadows and fears and such. And the book that we just wrote, the Doula Toolkit, actually speaks totally to that. So we thought, you know, and lots of doulas are buying our book, that's for sure, but other people are buying it too, so that they can prepare themselves, so that they can do their own work first if they're going to be a doula, but also to just do their own work for their own life. So to be 40 or 50 or 30 or whatever age you are, but to have already, you know, thought about your unfinished business, to have already apologized to all the people that you might have hurt along the way, so that those things don't have to pop up 20 or 30 years from now on your bedside, is a gift that you're giving yourself. And it's also a gift that you're giving others too, if you take the time to think about your own legacy or to write a vigil plan of your own, you know. So I kind of earlier when I wanted to say something, it was around that topic of doing your own work and the importance of why we step into this space as doulas, not just for the dying.
Yeah. Yeah. I echo that, Diane. I think it's very important for people who are in the end of life space, which is a very sensitive space. Let's be honest. I mean, people, you know, people are going through acceptance on so many different levels. You're dealing with vulnerable family members. You're dealing potentially with a medical situation that's changing day by day. And to come in and be that sort of steady boat on an ocean with waves that are tossing around, you really want someone who has developed that proficiency and that competency to learn how to sort of be that sort of like Zen force in a space that, you know, can be ever changing. So 2 questions, just practical questions. Is there a cost to having a death doula? Yes, generally, right? And are death doulas covered by insurance? So Diane, I think I'll throw that out to you first, and then we can all weigh in.
Okay. The fast answer is no, we're not covered by insurance. That might change, but when that changes, a lot of other things are going to change because of certification and regulations. We're unregulated now. That's why, you know, we really want everyone to be trained. And when it comes to the cost, it's a difficult question. It's a great question. And a lot of times doulas will charge, and they might base it on something equivalent in their own community. So there's no way that one of us is going to say a dollar amount or what have you, because it's different all over around the country. But almost every doula I know works on a sliding scale, because, you know, we're bringing our hearts to this work. And when someone calls and they're having some struggles about their end of life, we're not going to turn them down for money. I don't know one doula who would turn somebody down because they couldn't afford to pay. So the sliding scale works the best. We take a lot of pro bono clients in our practice. There are people who call themselves maybe community doulas, or they're just only volunteer doulas. So that does exist, you know? So I think the idea is to look at the resource that Angela suggested at NEDA and look at different names and search doulas in your area and ask, and, you know, let people know if finances are a problem, because at least from what I know, it's never gotten in the way. You know, we have to make a living. We don't make a living. There's no such thing really as making a living yet as a doula, because it's weird. You can't have 12 clients. You know, we work at night, we work on weekends. It's pretty random, our schedule. So if we've got a few clients going at once, then we can have a fairly full practice. So most people are doing other things to supplement their income on the side.
Yeah. Regarding insurance, I wanted to point out that I agree with you, Diane. I think we're really moving in this direction because in New York State, there just was a law signed into effect that says that Medicaid has to cover birth doulas. So end of life doulas cannot be far behind, especially because, you know, as a society, we are aging and we are aging rapidly, and there is going to be sort of a death explosion soon. And there are going to be a lot of people who are interested in these services, who want insurance to cover it, who feel that insurance to cover it. There are going to be medical professionals who advocate for insurance to cover it so it can become more available. So I do think that that is on the horizon. Gabby, what do you think about that? What do you see from inside the sort of medical side of that?
Well, I think I mean, I echo everything that Diane just said. If we are going to be insured, then we have to be regulated, which means there should be some sort of certificate, you know, and really truly go that route. I think that would change things. The truth of the matter, though, is that, you know, this isn't a job. When someone says, "What do?" You can say you're a doula, but it's not how we pay our bills. And I would say the majority of us as end of life doulas are really just guides and there to support, and it's not about the money. So if we were going to go that route, I think it would change things significantly. It might actually be better, maybe, in that at least we know that the people doing this work now are going to get the training, because I think some are not, and I think you need it.
Yeah.
I'm less concerned about insurance and certificates as I am as the person who goes to the bedside. How can we make sure that person truly has the skills to be that present? And do they know what that means? I am far more worried about that, because I think everyone's thinking, I'll take this class, I'll take the shorter one because that's easy. Look, I made it through the weekend. I got my new doula, I graduated, and I'm going to start selling myself as that. But do they know what it means? Do they understand how truly sacred death is, and how powerful that last breath is, and what it means, and what an honor? Do they understand that? I am more worried about that.
Yeah. Angela, what do you think, besides, you know, sort of going blind and looking up on the NIDA website for someone local in your community? I mean, would you say word of mouth, speak to funeral directors, how's a good way to find a doula that maybe comes with sort of a recommendation, like a personalized recommendation?
You know, I think that if you don't know a doula, starting at one of those directory sites like NIDA is helpful, or reaching out to the trainers to ask for someone that they recommend, or even one of the leaders on the NIDA board of directors.
Okay.
I do think you can talk to other vendors and other death educators in the area to see if they have somebody in mind. I know that for myself, I think that's how the majority of people find me, is very much word of mouth, or just kind of what Gabby was talking about earlier. I'm comfortable speaking on death, and I do often, and people recognize that. So they might reach out to me just because they've heard me speak, or because somebody, you know, just word of mouth. Um, Sharing just on social media a little bit that this is an offering that I have. I've never done any advertising. I've never really felt that I needed to do it. I don't know how the other two feel, but the clients find you. And it seems like the ones who need your specific skill set find you just at the right time too.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't want anyone who's thinking about entering the field to become discouraged. Diane, when you said that, like, you'll never make a living being a doula, like, all of us, we're all doulas, all four of us, and we all do lots of other work in the end of life field. So even though we may not be working full time tending to clients as doulas, we're writing, we're speaking, we're doing death education, we're doing funeral planning, we're doing all of that stuff. So I wouldn't want to, it's a fine line, you know. I mean, it's like a fine line between being cognizant of that it's not about the money, but also being cognizant that your time is worth money, right? And I know, at least for me, and I know for all of you too, we do so much death education on a volunteer basis, right? Like, it is okay for us to charge if we have a client who's willing to pay and wants to pay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Matilda, because I think I agree with you. And Diane's right as well. It's hard to make a living just on being an end of life doula or a death doula, just that alone. But it's easy to come into all these other spaces that death occupies when you're in this work.
Mhm.
And like you were saying, even opportunities of offering grief workshops in your community, legacy
Yeah.
projects, doing talks. It really is possible to have this end of life be your career, if not necessarily,
Mhm.
the doula being what's paying for it.
Right, right. And I think all that stuff complements each other too, right? Like all
Right.
of your, anytime you run, I know anytime I run a bereavement group, I take the knowledge of that I've gained from the people who have come to my group, and I can bring it into the end of life space if I'm working with a person.
Right.
Gabby, did you have your hand up to say something?
Yeah, I'm kind of going to follow with what Angela said, in that I love that you said that. Don't let what we're saying discourage you. I think we have to find a real good balance there. Are you going to make lots of money? Well, maybe you will. I mean, who knows, as long as that's not
Mhm.
your motivation. But I think the three of us, and the reason we wrote the Doula Toolkit was because however this looks for you, however this works out, whatever your training, whatever your experience prior, wherever you go, all we ask is that you have the tools to do it. So
Mhm.
we want you to be successful in this work, but really success is not necessarily monetary. Success as a
Right.
doula is honoring a death and being there for someone so they know they are supported and cared for well.
Mhm. So I think, so when you're starting out working with a client, right? How would this progress? Would you have an initial meeting to come together, determine the client's needs, what's most important to them? Of course, right? As with any like medical professional or any professional, when you have that first meeting, a client can say, I'm not sure that you're the right doula for me, right? Or you can say, I may not be able to give you what you need. So then I just wanted to point out that most doula trainings, I know ours does, contain an ethics component and talking about referring out if the situation is not appropriate or it becomes like difficult to work together, or for whatever reason the client circumstances change or your circumstances change, like there is an ethical component to continuation of care. And again, it's a relationship that is evaluated as people move through it, whether a client may feel that they want a doula who concentrates on different things. Like Diane, for instance, you were talking about a maid doula. So we may have some doulas that don't do maid work, but a client is interested in maid, and when the client gets to that point, they will refer to a maid doula.
Yeah. We just had a call today for somebody who wanted to do an end of life, a psychedelic assisted, guide person at the end of life. And we don't do that in our doula practice. So
Mm-hmm.
part of answering that question of like building your business and even talking to the not making a living on it part, like I think one of the misconceptions is you take a class and you're going to hang your shingle and then all of a sudden you're going to have, that's like, I mean, that's where it's just, I don't see that happening. But once you start integrating in your community, then now I know somebody who I can call to recommend, in an hour, I'll call my friend and she will probably take that client. And that's
Mm-hmm.
how we work together. We get to know each other. We match the fit. If I'm not the right fit, then hopefully one of the 4 doulas in my group or my group of my network will be able to support that client, always looking at the best interest of the client first and foremost, acknowledging that you might not be the right person. So that helps build our community base. We get to know the other doulas in our town, and then we start referring each other. And then the word gets spread better, and we're all doing the best job we can because we're offering the services that we're really qualified and wanting to offer. So I think coming together as a team is a really helpful part, and getting to know each other as well.
Mm-hmm. How do you all feel about the term doula to describe the work that we do? Do you feel, I personally struggle with that label. I'm not sure why, and I don't have a good alternative. And I've done a fair amount of thinking about this. I'm like, is it an end of life coach? Is it an end of life companion? Like, what is it exactly? So how do you feel about the term doula as applying to the kind of work that we do at the end of life? Angela, I'll start with you.
I've thought about this a lot too, Matilda. As I think in this work, we see so many different variations, midwives or soul midwives and companions, end-of-life specialists. I've seen death navigators or death tour guides.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different things. I always found it really interesting that the word doula is actually, originated in ancient Greece, and it meant a woman who serves other women. So, which
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes a lot of sense how that translated later to birth midwives becoming birth doulas. And now that doula word really does mean somebody who's companioning at that life transition. So I feel comfortable with it. I do feel that I am still explaining what that is to some people, still explaining what an end of life or death doula is, but really looking at the meaning of what it means to be of service and to companion someone at a transformative life phase, I think does speak to this work very well.
Mm-hmm. Gabby, what about you? How do you feel about it?
I find that if I'm talking to someone who doesn't know what a doula is and I explain it, the first thing they think is that I'm a birthing doula. And then I have to
Yeah.
explain what's the opposite end. I'm there for deaths. I've often thought about another name I'd want to use. I'm not really a coach. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not really a, motivator.
Right.
Am I a companion? I think really, I think we're just a presence, and it's a gentle presence,
Mm-hmm.
and it's under the doula umbrella, but because we all bring something so different, it might be kind of fun to just change the name. As I'll say I'm a conscious dying educator, or sometimes I'll say I'm a end of life doula. Sometimes I'll say I'm a sacred passage doula. I mean, all of those are on my pieces of paper. But at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, really what I'm going to do is walk alongside you and remind you that you're not alone. And if you looked up doula, none of those words would be there. So I think because it is getting more well known, there's less questions about it. But
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I think it deserves its own title.
Yeah, maybe we can have a contest and,
Yes.
select a winner. But I think that's so key, Gabby, what you said is that because I think people are very afraid of death because they're very afraid of being alone throughout the experience. And that is a fear that's actually grounded in reality because we have recently so hidden death away and so almost refused to talk about the fact that it happens. And, there's all of this discussion about someone who's ill at the end of life. Well, she put up a good fight, and, almost like death is a failure in some ways. And I think that leads to people just being very, very afraid of feeling very alone through the experience and not being able to talk to people about it, not being able to talk about how they feel about it. I think too, people are afraid of, one day they might feel very afraid. The next day they might be in a place of acceptance. And then the day after that, they might be very afraid again. It's like being with someone who's willing to ride that roller coaster of this very intense experience of getting towards the end of your life without saying, but yesterday you felt this way. And well, how come you said that? Like, just as you say, just being fully present and companioning on that road, on that journey. Yeah.
I think our role, even as a hospice nurse, but in general, if we're at the bedside with someone who is dying, is to give them permission to feel whatever they need to feel, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
fear. I saw
Yeah.
a comment someone made on a Facebook page. It must have been a hospice something. And the person said, she used the word something along the lines of, well, I've failed. The disease has gotten me. I'm dying now.
Mm-hmm.
And someone responded, don't use those words to describe it. Now, that might not would have been what she said, but kind of that's the general idea. And I wanted so badly to chime in, but it definitely was not my place. And I didn't want to get involved in their argument. But I don't think we get to tell someone not to feel afraid. I think we have to be the ones that say something more to the lines of, how are you feeling through all of this? And do you want to talk about that? And fear, that's way up here. It's scary. And none of us here today are going to tell someone that it's not scary or don't be afraid. Instead, we're going to ask them to share that and maybe give them the safe place to talk about what that fear looks like for them, so that they can maybe let some of that go and be okay with their vulnerability. And I think that's our role. We don't get to tell someone how to feel. And the other end too, like if someone says, I'm so ready to die, I've got this, I've had a great life, this is great, I can't wait to die. Okay. You know, that's
And
less
that does
hurt,
happen. There are
right?
people who arrive in this space who really feel complete.
And it's not our place. It's not we don't get to tell someone how to feel about their life, about their death, or their grief. This is a unique individual experience. And as a community, I think our role is just to listen and be there.
Yeah. Diane, I wonder, I know some doulas have strong feelings about this. What's your preferred term, death doula or end of life doula?
You know, listening to everything Angela and Gabby said, I was actually thinking about that very thought, because even those two terms are so kind of at odds with each other. We haven't even landed on those two basic terms. It took me a long time to even just warm up to the word doula. And now it's kind of like, I guess I've heard it and said it so many times, it feels a lot more natural to me now. And I use both. I prefer end of life doula. All of us do a lot of writing, and I think in the media, death doula is kind of the thing to say because it draws attention and it makes people kind of go, wow, that's an interesting thing to do. Let's talk about that. But then when I'm working with a client, I don't know, especially when I first meet somebody, what their threshold is for talking about death. Some people don't feel comfortable with the word death doula, but end of life doula has a much more gentle feel. So I tend to use that when I'm introducing myself or when I'm talking to people. And philosophically, I feel strongly that we're end of life doulas, because I always say death is just one day. So to me, I am bringing my hopes for this client's entire end of life journey along. Like I want to be able to offer them tools to look at how to live the best possible life from the day that I meet them or the day they get their diagnosis up until the day they die. And that's could be so many, many days. So I prefer, the term end of life, just because I feel like that really expresses the journey that we go on with our clients until that one day that they die.
Yeah, that's great. I like that too. So I want to clarify, first of all, the book, The Doula Toolkit, is not just for doulas, right? It's for anyone who's interested in becoming reflective about their life, looking at things they might want to get together and resolve towards the end of their life. Diane, you have also written another book called Dear Death, which contains exercises like that. And Gabby, I know you have written several books. Do you want to talk a little bit about your books?
Yeah, well, including our Doula Toolkit, I've written 8 with one coming out in the next 2 weeks. I think they all really, honestly, they've kind of been written along my own journey as I learned what this means to be at someone's bedside. And my first 3 were really my journey, my story. And then because of the Hospice Heart Facebook page, I get a lot of emails and messages. And one was titled, "What would Gabby say?" Like she was asking me my opinion on something. So I started getting a lot of those. So I created a book for them, right? And it's all of the questions they've all asked me and what my answers to them were. But then I decided I wanted to create some easy to read guides that people could have in their book bag or in their trunk or in their, whenever they're seeing someone or just when they have somebody who is dying. And so this group of 4, the first one is end of life tips. all the questions that we get asked most often in a way that's not speaking to someone who has this experience, although it would be helpful for them, but to help somebody understand who hasn't done this work or who hasn't been with someone who's dying and be maybe less afraid. So I give those answers. The second one is about medical aid in dying, because I am a proponent of that and I am an advocate. And I have been with 200 people who have chosen to take the medications. And I see fear, and I see some people that do not support that. How can they still share that bedside with their loved one, even though they don't support the act itself? So I wrote a little book called Dignity Day to support them. During all of this, my brother died. And as somebody who has all the skills in the world, right, all this experience, I realized that I had absolutely no idea what to do. And so I went on my own journey about grief and what that meant. And so I wrote Healing a Grieving Heart about my journey and what worked for me. And then the fourth book, which I'm not telling anyone yet about, really kind of rounds it all out. And that's kind of where I'm going to stop, because that's the information I would want people to know.
Yeah. And Angela, you have so many great resources on your website. Everybody's website has been put in the chat. So people should go to Diane, Gabby, Angela's website, see more of their work, see more of what they're up to, upcoming, speaking that they might be doing. Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's so great that we're having this conversation. And when I tell people that I work in this field, there's so much curiosity about it. Everybody wants to know about death doulas. What do they do? We just got a last minute question. Are there male doulas? Yes, there are male doulas. There are currently more women than men in the field, but we were going to have one of our colleagues at the University of Vermont was unfortunately unable to join us tonight because he's working. But there are more and more men entering the field. And it's really important. And, for some people, a woman might be better. For other people, a man might be better. I just think that with the rise of the doula profession and more people training as doulas and being interested in this work and really putting it out there, there are more and more opportunities for people to find just the right fit for themselves and just the right person to work with. And I know that it can be such a tremendous relief, not only to the client, but also to the family too, to have someone, a neutral, supportive party going along on that journey. Yeah. So it looks like we're at time almost. And I just want to thank you all again so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and yourselves. I know we had a great crowd. There were so many people who were interested in this program. So it's time well spent, and we really thank you very much.
Yes, on behalf of the Merchants House, I'd just like to give an absolutely huge thank you to all of you, to Diane, Angela, and Gabby for being here this evening and for sharing yourselves with us, and also, of course, to Matilda for putting together this program series. As you all mentioned, death was just such a familiar thing for people in the 19th century. And so in the spirit of that, we're really grateful at the museum to be able to host these important discussions.
And just let me just jump in and talk about the next program in the series, which is going to be in just about 2 weeks on Thursday, April 11th. I'll be speaking with the amazing Monica Torres, a young contemporary embalmer who was drawn to the profession really out of her desire to help and serve people. And it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Monica has put out there are no questions off limits. So if you register and you want to submit a question, please feel free. Don't worry about it. You can go to the Merchants House website and register for that program. It also will be free.
Wonderful. Yes. And so everybody can join us for that. You can register online on our website at merchantshouse.org/calendar. If you have not yet submitted your letter to the Adams administration urging them to step in and help save the Merchants House, please do. I am reposting the link in the chat here for your convenience. And please, we hope that you all stay in touch. We know that we have many sort of new people to the Merchants House joining us this evening. And so we would love for you to follow us on social media and join our email list and stay in the loop with everything that we're doing. The Merchants House is open to visitors on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays with options for both guided and self-guided visits. And so we do really hope to see you soon. Our program tonight was presented free of charge, but we do hope that you will consider making a donation to support future programming at the Merchants House and in support of our fight against the development next door. You can donate online at merchantshouse.org/support. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and particularly to our guests. Thank you so much for being here, and have a great night, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, everyone.